Hello everyone, it's Eric, and now I want to talk about setting up an IK rig. IK for Inverse Kinematics, and that's a big term for, in this case, keeping the feet planted when you move your rig around. This is a pro-only feature. So if you don't have Anime Studio Pro or Moho Pro, you're not going to have this. Let's take a look at what IK does. So I'm just in frame 0. So I'll get my Manipulate Bones tool and I'll grab that base bone and I'll move them down. See, when I do that, the feet stay in place. It's great for jumps, it's great for walks, it's great for all kinds of things. You can apply it to hands as well. But in this tutorial, I want to focus just on legs, and that's why I'm starting with just a little biped character. You can also grab this thing called a target bone, which we'll be creating, and you can see it also lifts and comes back down and controls the whole leg. So it's all really useful for character animation. So we're going to start with building this little guy, and then we're going to add the IK to the rig. I'm going to start by building the character just as a little reminder for you, and we are going to do a character with just legs and a body, no arms. Let's keep it simple so we don't get distracted. So I'm going to choose a brown so you can see the bones more clearly during this. They are blue or red when selected. So let's have a color that's not blue or red. So I'll start just by getting the oval in the shape tool. And let's draw out a body. Let me move that up a bit. There we go. And switch to the rectangle tool. And I'm going to draw out a leg, and then I'm going to make another box for the foot. So select both of those, copy and paste. I'll move them over, move that over here, flip it, I use the flip horizontally up here on the control bar if you missed that. And there we have our basic character. Let me just clean that up a tiny bit. There. Now, let's add the bones. I'll add a bone layer. I will put this character layer inside the bone layer. Go back to the bone layer and get my add bone tool, and I'm going to click and drag up from here to create the base bone in the hips. Now that bone's still selected. A reminder, the next bone created will be a child of that bone. So let's start at the top of this leg and drag halfway down to where the knee would be. Now that bone is selected, so the next one will be a child again. Drag down to the ankle. And the same. So I'll drag that one out. And for this kind of rig, for the foot and everything else, it's best if the bones go from base to tip, base to tip. Don't have space between them is my recommendation. So now I need to deselect all my bones and then reselect this base bone so that it's the parent of the other leg. 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. Let's get our bone strength tool, and on these legs, let's just bring down the strength so it's pretty close to the edges. Bring down the foot a bit. Same here. Doesn't matter that it's not covering the whole hips. If I did that, it would be really taking control of everything. And normally I don't use this kind of binding. I usually use point binding or flexi binding, but let's just keep this simple. So I'll get my Manipulate Bones tool and let's just see how this is working. It's working okay. You can see the knees aren't bending. And of course, that's because there are no points for the knee joint. So let me go ahead and go back to that layer. One good reason to just not put those points in until this point, no pun intended, is that now I can see where the joint is. So I can just go ahead and add the points pretty precisely. Let's go back here. Zoom out. There we go. Now let me show you. There's no IK yet, so of course if I grab that base bone, moves the whole thing, the feet move with it. That kind of works in an inverse kinematics way, but not as good as having a target bone. So let's go ahead and do the magic. Let's put in the inverse kinematics bones. First thing we want to do is make sure no bones are selected. If you really want to be sure, hit the escape key on your keyboard. That will deselect everything when you're on the bone layer. Get the add bone tool. Let's zoom in a bit on that ankle because we want it to be attached at the base right to the bottom of this shin bone. Here, I'll select it. This is the lower leg bone, the shin. Deselect that so that this isn't parented. You should never have your target bone be the child or the parent of everything, of anything. So I'll click and drag out. I will deselect. And then I'll do the same on the other side. Click and drag out. Those are my target bones. Two things. First, I'm going to go into bone strength and turn those all the way down to 0. Always check the bone strength up here in the control bar to make sure it went all the way to 0. It's very easy to leave just a very tiny amount of strength and it can have an effect. So down to 0. Got it right both times. Nothing's happening yet. That bone just gets left behind. Of course not, we haven't done the magic. I'll select this bone and I'm going to name it left target. You don't have to name them, but it's easier when you're setting the target to aim for one that's named than to try and remember that this is B9. So I'm going to name that right target. Okay, let's do the magic and create a chain. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a target out of this bone we named left target and right target. And what we're going to do is we're going to select this lower leg bone and we're going to tell it to target the bone that we named. So I'm going to go into bone constraints and about halfway down there's target. Go to the drop down and you can see why I named it. There's left target. And I've made it a target bone now. If I zoom in, you can probably see there's now a little bullseye right there. That says it's a target. I'm going to do the same with the other shin, only this time I'm going to put it to right target. And let's test that. Ta-da! Zoom out a bit. You're probably seeing the two problems I'm seeing. One, that's pulling away from the targets as it goes too far away. And two, those feet, we don't want them moving around like that. Not automatically. So let's fix both of those. But first I want to show you one other thing with this target, which is a mistake I see people make all the time. What they do is they'll put their target bone somewhere other than right at the tip of the bone that's targeting it. And what will happen, get rid of that, what will happen, see that when I go to animate, it wants to get to the target. So let's not do that. Let's set this up so that it's ready to animate and doesn't have any weirdness that's not showing up in frame 0. So I'll just grab that put it right to the tip of the shin bone. You can see probably that snaps into place. And so when I come back out to animate, hey, it doesn't look any different. All right, let's fix the foot angle first. So I'm going to select this foot, go to bone constraints, and you'll see the second one down is independent angle. I'm going to check that. I'm going to get the other foot and do the same thing. There. Now they're not rotating. There's a little motion in the points because of the bone strength binding, but that's another thing to work on some other time. It's still pulling away. Let's fix that. I'm going to select all 4 leg bones and go back to bone constraints, and a little bit, about a third of the way down, you'll see maximum IK stretching. I'm going to set that to 2. That allows those bones to stretch to 2 times their original length. Animation's about squashing and stretching. Don't feel like you only want a tiny bit. Give yourself more than you need, and just don't use everything if you don't want it. Better to have too much than too little. So now, ta-da! I can do all this, and I can also grab my target bones and move them around. They stay in place when I move the main, but I can also move the legs with them back this way. Now when you go to animate, no matter what you saw in frame 0, the knees are always going to bend in the same direction. And you may not want this in this particular setup because you want the knee to point out towards the same way the foot is facing, right? So let's go ahead and I'll show you how to tell the rig to always bend in the direction you want. And it is possible to change the direction the knee is pointing during animation, but that's more advanced and it's something for another day. All you have to do is just put a slight bend in the knee in the direction you want it to go. There we go. Slight bend. And now that will always bend out, you will see. And I want to make sure that's snapped in place. Do the same with this one. Make sure that's snapped in place. Come down. Now when you're testing in frame 0, depending on where you go, there it is. That one's going in the wrong direction. But that's just frame 0. I don't ever understand that. Let's come out to frame 1. You'll notice there was no popping on the foot, so I got my target bones back right. And those knees will always go out unless I get more advanced. So, there you are. I hope you've successfully built your first IK rig or built an IK rig that works better than ones you've done in the past. And feel free to ask questions in the comments.